All right. I think it's going to work this time. All right. Hello.
I think it's going to work this time.
It does. It did work. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital. We are a collaborative community of women who work in digital and choose to share our knowledge, power, and connections. You can learn more about our community and join the movement at www.togetherindigital.com. And as I mentioned earlier to our live listening audience, while our conversation today is not steeped in discussing particular industry trends or digital, it is all about a very important topic for our members and for our listeners, and that is power. I mean, after all, it is in the podcast name. So what does it mean to reclaim your power? It means slowing down to be able to speed back up with more peace, passion, and purpose. I hope you'll take a listen very intently over the next 50 minutes to an hour to really understand how you can begin to explore the power of self-discovery and how you can allow your passions and your purpose to discover you. We are here today with Lauren Krasnodembski, and she's the creator of Mind Muscle Motivator, LLC, a transformational wellness company that guides busy, driven women like us to step into their life with peace, passion, and purpose. She does this through her creative writing, speaking, and experimental workshops and retreats. Lauren believes that your mind is like a muscle and it gets to be exercised and needs to be exercised regularly so that you can live with fulfillment from your heart space. Lauren is the author of Reclaim Your Power, a guide to follow your passion and purpose to discover you. Highly recommend it. I'm working through it right now and loving every moment I get to spend with it. She is married to her high school sweetheart and is blessed with 2 children and working her way up as a private attorney for a Fortune 100 company. Lauren can be found on the water and enjoys meeting new people, eating delicious food, and spreading the light and love with her to herself and to others. So Lauren, thank you so much for bringing your light here today to share more about how we can discover more about our purpose and our passion, if I could say these words.
Thanks for having me, Amy. It's exciting to be here with you busy ladies.
Right. I know. I'm always glad when I see people show up for conversations like these. I think it's always an idealized thing and it's sometimes hard to put into practice. So absolutely the first part of practice is just showing up. So congratulations to everyone who's here today and everyone who is listening to the podcast. You did it. You made the first step. You showed up. Lauren, go ahead.
I said, amen. half the battle is getting there.
Right?
Yeah.
So true. So we're glad to have you here with us today, as I said, and I would love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about your backstory. And I'm specifically referring to kind of how you open and talk about what drove you towards this in your book. How did you come to find your own power?
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. Let's see. I guess where it started is like most of us in life, like we all have like these like things that we like set out to like, in our life, whether we know it or not. And some of mine were, work my way up the corporate ladder after graduating law school and having kids and kind of turning our house into like a cozy home and like getting married, like all these things, right? That I think a lot of us have, some might be different than others. Some might be staying at home or not working or whatever the case may be, but we all have these kind of like mental checklists in our head, whether we like it or not. So I like went out on that quest to kind of fulfill what, I thought I wanted. And one of like my last check marks, and apparently I set the bar pretty low, was like a financial check mark because I had achieved a lot of the things that I had set out to do. And so I hit this kind of like last check mark in my mind and I'm like, oh God, what next? And it kind of felt like I have all these things that I set out to do, but when I was really kind of in more quiet moments, which I didn't have a lot of, I was kind of like, man, I should feel more like fulfilled, right? Or like, why am I not getting more joy out of life? And it just kind of kept sitting with me, and I didn't really know what to do with it, because we're supposed to be grateful for what we have, and like think positively, don't have these like negative feelings and all this stuff. And so it was like kind of a lot to sit with. And my mom, who is much more eccentric than I am, although I think she's turned me into
right
into the other side. But so she was like, and at the time, like this was like 5 or 6 years ago now, she took my sister and I to a palm reader, because like we already had like enough things for Christmas. And so I'm like sitting at this chick's house who's like reading, and I'm just like, overworked and just tired. I'm like, hopefully she can tell me something.
right
And so she's reading the lines on my hands. Half of it, I'm like, we're not comprehending this. And she had asked me a question, like, what are you passionate about? And like, she's like staring me at my eyes, and like, I'm like supposed to have an answer for her. And I was like, I have no idea. Like, I don't even think the word passion like resonated with me at that point, because I felt so passionless. And she's like, well, what are you passionate about? And I was like, oh God. And I didn't really love my answer. It was like at the time drinking with my friends, because I think that really brought like a stress relief to me, right? From all the things that I was managing and dealing with. And yeah, so I just left this chick's house like really hot and bothered, like, wow, this is where I'm at. This is great. And yeah, I just went on like an inward quest to kind of, like ask and you shall receive, right? So I was like asking, like, what am I passionate about? And this kind of just sent me down this like inward trajectory of like self-discovery for like the next 4 years, which is what I write about in my book. And what I realized is like kind of going through this like self-discovery process is I actually started to reclaim my power in various different ways. And kind of when I like to say I got out of my dark days,
yeah
I just really felt called to like give this back to the world. I'm like, wow, if I can go from this to this, living kind of the same life, right, and feeling so much more fulfillment and passion and just honestly inner peace, I'm like, I gotta share this with other people. So that's kind of how I'm here today.
I love it. That's amazing. And as I was reading your book, I related so much to the stories of sort of that mental checklist and societal checklist, quite honestly, as to like who we're supposed to be, the titles we're meant to have, and, very similar. And I know a lot of maybe past guests and listeners have been in this space where it's like you kind of achieve that mental or societal checklist. And then you're looking around going, why am I not happy? Why am I not fulfilled? I did all the things, I checked all the boxes. And for me, I think a lot of it too was, realizing that chasing material and numbers just left me numb. And then I continued to numb myself through work and achieving and doing. And that's what I love about your philosophy about slowing down, is because I think sometimes we assume in order to find or achieve passion or purpose that we have to chase it, or we have to move faster, or we have to have somehow more time in our day for it. So I wanted you to kind of dig in a little bit more to help our listeners understand, why does the idea of slowing down to speed up? What are some other ways that this trips us up? And then how did you at first, you said this was a 4-year journey. How did you at first resist slowing down?
Oh, well, let me tell you, I said I was going to have more control, and I was not going to slow down. That's how that happened. I specifically remember there was like a time in my life where I was like working crazy hours. Like I was helping my dad with some stuff. And like my kids were super, super small at that point, and just juggling like way too many things. And like the person who I was like talking to about my dad's stuff, for some support, she was like, I really think you just like need to go and get a massage. And I was like, absolutely not. There's not any time for that. Like I remember vividly driving in the car and like just objection after objection of what this lady was telling me to go do. And so I really, I think when you're in stuff, right, like that's what your mind does. Like it objects like whatever you feel like you probably want to be doing, but feel like you can't. So I resisted, right? I tried to take control of the situation, which I feel like a lot of us do, right? Especially if we're like kind of busy and driven. It's like that control aspect really gives us like a sense of ease, temporary ease.
Yeah.
But it's like almost false, right? So I resisted for a long time. And it wasn't until really I learned like the art of surrender that I really started feeling a little bit more at peace. And that really happened, I would say, like yoga. And I'll be honest, I have a love-hate relationship with yoga because it actually forces you to slow down. And yoga is not just in your traditional sense of like downward dog or like, you know, going to a yoga studio and like practicing. Like yoga can be through sound, you know, taking a walk outside, like really like connecting with yourself. So I just want to make that like known that yoga is like much broader than just the traditional like practice, but it honestly forces me to slow down. So that's why it's a love-hate relationship.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree. And then I think, did you ever find yourself over time, like craving that slowdown? I think that's where I am right now personally is, you know, I have learned when my mind won't stop moving that maybe my body needs to, or that maybe I actually need to be still and like not do anything for 5 minutes. I was actually hosting a workshop for goal getting. I did 2 of them in the same week, both 2 hours long. And the second facilitation at the end, I was like, I just need to not do anything for like an hour. And it was just funny because here I had just done this whole workshop on goal setting and achievement. And I'm like, and now I need to do nothing. Like, I think after a while you start to crave it and you start to look for places and spaces in which you find ease and the pause, because I agree with you. It's not something you can like force yourself into. And if yoga is not your thing, it is like, I love your broader definition of yoga and slowing down. That's great.
Yeah, it was definitely something that felt very uncomfortable with me. And that's why like I created, that's how my name, the Mind Muscle Motivator. It's because it's like, it really does take practice, just like you would show up at a gym to get stronger. Like there was points in my career where like I couldn't like leave my phone or my computer behind because I felt like, right, that connection. Oh, if I'm not available for somebody, then they're going to think I'm like not working. Right. And so even just like that exercise of like taking that break and like building that up, right? Like I would never be able to like leave my computer for an hour and do this. Like I just, in my mind, I was like, that's not okay. Right. And so training your mind to think differently about the way you look at rest or the way you look about doing things for yourself, because when we pour into ourselves, like it's like amazing now what I can give back to others because I'm actually taking care of myself, you know?
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Such good reasons to slow down. And it sounds, it's not counterintuitive, but it probably sounds a little morose to some. But I think another thing in like the practice of mindfulness and yoga and things like that is embracing the idea of impermanence as a reason to slow down, and also to help us find our purpose and calling. That's sort of how I see it. I was curious as to how you see us embracing impermanence to help find our purpose and calling.
Yeah, I mean, everything's changing, whether we like it or not, you know, and I think it goes back to the control thing, right? Like when you can't embrace change, right? More than probably there's something under rooted there, right? In the fact that like I needed control, right? And so I hated change, right? But I like to look at like nature, right? And I did like a retreat, and one of our exercises like was to go literally take a solo walk by yourself in nature for 1 hour and just like notice what we notice, right? Because in nature, it like teaches you about your nature. And it was like so cool because one, I had never done that. And two, and you had to leave your phone behind too. So like, that was like another, oh, okay. You want to got it. Let me bring my mace, but no.
And the bear spray.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was weird. Like the things that I had noticed of how, like, even from like the pace at which I was walking to like how things were moving in nature, like, and I was like, so unlike that. Right. And so noticing, like, you just notice things about yourself in nature that's a great self-discovery exercise right there. So, and obviously we live in Ohio, so we have like the 4 seasons and whatnot, but like, you know, stuff falls, like, you know, we always have to constantly ask ourselves, like, what's no longer serving us? Like, what do we need to get rid of? And then there's like always, you know, a time for like rebirth and you know, what are we generating? And so it's like, it's cool to use kind of need when you think about impermanence and change, and you can learn a lot about yourself and like why you're here or what you need to work on, or through nature really. And there's like a quote by, I think is it John Maxwell? It's like, I think he says like change is inevitable, but like growth is like optional.
Yes.
And I remember like kind of reflecting on that in the sense that like you can be, you know, in change, right? But there's a difference to be in change and then like learning from the change and like growing and asking yourself, you know, what's here for me. And I think just even having that mindset is really helpful in allowing your like passions and purpose to find you. Because the more self-discovery work that we do, like I truly believe that then our passions and purpose like are shown through that. Like then it just comes to you. Because a lot of people like don't know what their passion is or what their purpose is. And you know, Yeah.
I wanted to come back to the idea of surrender. A lot of folks in our group love to do word of the year, and without even intending to make a choice one, it just kind of popped in my head one day, and it was allow. Because it feels like anytime there's a moment of tension or stress or concern, inward or outward, I have to realize that there has to be an option to allow, because what's about to happen and unfold is an opportunity to learn something about myself or to learn something in general about the world. So I wanted to share that. And then on this idea too, when you mentioned, you know, spending time walking alone in the woods, you know, I think one of the other interesting growth points I've experienced is that I realized it was for the longest time, I'd actually have like panic attacks when I would travel for business and not be with my family, because I forgot what it felt like. And I did not know how to be comfortable with being alone. And so learning how to be alone and not be lonely and be with your own thoughts, for some people like myself, who, you know, had gone from same thing, married my high school sweetheart, got married relatively young, moved from home to a roommate to being married to, you know, having kids like 12 years later, but still like I'm very little time do I spend in my day alone. And as you mamas that are listening know, that includes the time that you're trying to go to the bathroom in the day. So it's like, even just sitting in the car without the radio on was a challenge. Like you're always kind of seeking and looking for that distraction to remove you from yourself. So for those of you who are listening, I think I wanted to share that because it just was really a powerful moment in realizing that time spent with myself was actually a gift, and I needed to stop trying to get out of it by distracting myself with other things. And then also the idea of like our attachment to permanence, thinking that we are going to live and be here forever. The fact of the matter is none of us are. Like so far, everybody that's ever been here has died. And to me, that like makes me at least want to go, oh, I need to slow down, because if I don't, it's going to be gone so fast. And so kind of just moving through the motions, checking off those to-do lists and boxes. Like you said, Lauren, you're never going to get to and find yourself or your purpose if you aren't slowing down, and life is short. So kind of embrace that and move through it.
Yeah. Like I've had to check myself a couple times recently, because it's like, you know, I am more of a driven, goal oriented person. And, you know, like I want, you know, I have goals for this business and everything like that. And I have to keep reminding myself, if I'm not enjoying the process, then what's the point? Like, you know, I've learned from past experiences, like, okay, when you get that job or when you do this, or if you're, you know, it doesn't bring you happiness, right? If you're not enjoying the day to day, then you're not there, right? You're somewhere else. You're either in the past or you're in the future, right? So,
oh, that's so true. That's a good point too. Definitely fell into that space when I was still working like 70 hours plus a week and trying to be and do all the things, was that I was never present. I was always thinking of the past and reliving it and berating myself for it, or trying to think forward and not really focusing on now. That's a tremendous point. And you also noted, and how we can start to identify the things that make us feel more powerful or more energized versus powerless. How would you kind of, encourage our listeners to start to find and identify those things?
Yeah, it's super easy. And I wish like we were taught this in school, but we're not. I'm teaching my kids this. I'm like, what is your most important job in life? And they'll answer, like, to figure out what I like to do, what brings me energy, like that's their answer now.
That's great.
And because it's something that we're not taught. Like we are not, we're taught to pick a career, right? But like, how do you do that, right? You're not taught to follow things that like bring you energy or like to understand those. And so when I was kind of, I think it's like chapter 3 in the book, like called Hamster Wheel, where are like the merry-go-round of cycles. When I was trying to figure out like what's going on with me, like why can't I seem to get out of this? And I just like instinctively like grabbed a notebook, and for like, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks, I like carried this notebook around, and I just like drew a line in the center of the page and said, what brings me energy and what drains my energy? Cause like at that point I was so clouded and just like felt so off. Like I couldn't articulate what was going on within me. I just felt off all the time. So I just started writing down like things that I noticed were like taking my energy, or if like it was a certain person at work, or like, was I doing something specific like at home? And I just started creating these lists of things when I like felt good and when I felt bad. And it was little things, right, that like you miss because they're just so ingrained in your life. And just so to see that on paper, like after a period of time, I'm like, oh. And it was a little discouraging because my list of what draining my energy was quite long.
Yeah.
Like,
And
well, this is great.
Time that you spent like in your day was probably most of those things, right?
Yes. And it seems like so simple, but like, I'm telling you, it's like the simple shit that sticks. And I was just like, it just provided me with so much clarity. Like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, we do this as an energy audit as well when we do our goal getters, or when I host that workshop as well, is to do that energy audit from time to time, because you're right. Things change, things evolve constantly, and sort of kind of keeping yourself aware of those things allow you to know how, when, and where to delegate. So if you find your passion and your purpose, you then have the opportunity and time to pursue it. And I mean, I'm talking about things like thinking about what's for dinner. Like I remember one of the biggest things, since I've been running my business from home and starting to do more in person, but like working from home and having kids at home, holy hell, I don't know how we've been doing it, but a lot of us have been. And one of the things that would always set me off at the end of my day is I would literally like come off of some type of work thing, and then I would go straight downstairs, and the first thing I would ask is, so what's for dinner? And it would just make me so mad. And I was like, what am I resenting? Where is my resentment? And I learned that sometimes the mental load of deciding what's for dinner is stealing my energy. It's stealing my peace. So I signed up for one of those meal kit delivery system companies that brought boxes of meals to my doorstep and made it easier for me to have to decide less about what's for dinner each night. So little things like that. I think social media is another one people don't often consider. I think we default to it because it's a nice little numbing agent, but unless it's like giving you energy, is it someplace you should be spending your time and energy? Right?
Yeah. When I was doing like one-on-one coaching, like I had some of my clients do like a quarterly audit, because you could be following people that make you feel like shit, know? Like who are you following, or whose content are you taking in? If it's not making you feel good, or then remove them.
Oh, I love that. Yes, energy audits, y'all. Do them. So worthwhile. Awesome. All right, my next question was kind of big and broad, so you can answer this however you want. In what ways, through either your coaching or your own experience, in what ways do we tend to get in our own way when it comes to pursuing our power, purpose, calling?
Well, we overcomplicate it, for one. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
I think that for me, I was in a place when I first started my journey where like and this is kind of embarrassing to say, but where I didn't even like make the connection of like what was going on up here, right? Like I was just so on autopilot of doing like whatever needed to get done, and people looked at me to get stuff done, right? So it was like this added level of like wanting to please people, wanting to do good at whatever I do, and not even making the connection of like how I was talking upstairs to myself. Like that sounds, again, so simplistic, right? But like when you actually start to think about like, what is going on up there, right? It's a little bit like I remember working with my first coach, and she was like, I'm pretty sure like all of your thoughts are negative. And I was like, never really thought about that. And she was right. And I was like always like looking to the future, which was causing me anxiety of like what would, what may happen, which never did. And yeah, like you, like looking in the past, like, oh, I should have did that better. Right. And it's just like where energy goes, energy grows. Mm-hmm. And so I was not spending, again, going back to my energy wisely. Mm-hmm. So I think that what holds people back is a lot of the shoulds, right? What should I be doing versus actually what you want to be doing? Because that's going to be an energy suck right there. Talking to yourself in a negative way, or like replaying things in the past, which cause like depression and things like that, or thinking about things in the future that causes anxiety, right? Not being able to be in the present moment, I think are really two big ones that a lot of people struggle with. And then perfectionism. I know I still am working on recovering type A perfectionist and like taking like messy action, right? It's like, it's again, another muscle that I've just been continuing to build and to execute upon.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think perfectionism is definitely one way that we tend to overcomplicate things and get in our own way time and time again. I know a lot of our listeners probably relate to that as well.
One last one though. I think the biggest one is like, we don't give ourselves time, right? Like, so time is obviously all of our biggest resources. We're always saying we don't have enough time to do that. I wish I had time to do that. And it's like, you have to rethink about how you think about time. Like one of my chapters in my book is like, make time your bitch. So like, if you're not, like you get to decide where you spend your time. And I think that's hard to actually like fully conceptualize, right? Because it's like, I'm choosing to be at work, right? I'm choosing to do this. And so when you look at it and that's hard, right? Because it's just like, when you put that on you, it's like the raw truth, right? Like where we feel like we don't have a choice, but then at the end of the day, everything's a choice.
Yes. Oh, that's so true. I hope you're all taking notes. All right. Talking about kind of this idea of perfectionism. In your book, you also cite the work of Valerie Young, a Needy author and speaker and leading expert on imposter syndrome, around the 5 competency types. I'd love for you to share a little bit with our listeners about these 5 competency types, as I think they'll resonate.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you don't know what imposter syndrome was, and I didn't 6 years ago until another coworker was like, I think you have this. And I'm like, what's that? So I'm like Googling imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely have this. Where do I self-diagnose myself? But imposter syndrome is kind of like where you feel like a fraud. And so I did interview for my book, Valerie Young, who like literally has done a bunch of research on imposter syndrome. And she has like, who knew there were like types, right, to imposters? But there are 5 types that she's like identified in her research. And I think I identified with like 3 of them. So like one of them is being like a perfectionist, right? If you can't get it perfect, then somehow like you failed. The second one is like a superwoman. So like basically you're killing it at work, PTO mom, like maybe volunteer in the community. Like basically they think they have to excel in their family, all parts of life, right? And if they're failing in one of them, then they just like, they're an imposter basically. Yeah. There's the natural genius, which I can say I was not in this category. Basically where things like come so easy for somebody that if they do have to work at something, then it's like, then they feel as if like they're like not good enough, right? Because there wasn't that ease and flow, like they didn't just like get it. And then the fourth one is the soloist. And I did fall into this category where like, so like, let's say if you do something awesome at work, right? Like you did some accomplishments, but like you worked in like a team, or like maybe you even just need to like outsource like a gut check on like advice on something, right? Like, because I like either worked in a team or had to confirm what I already knew or something like that, then I felt like I couldn't take credit for like whatever work that I did. So like, unless you're doing it all by yourself, right, then you can't give yourself like that achievement award. And then the last one is like the expert, which I think kind of pairs well with like the perfectionism too, but basically like you never actually go out and do something because it's like, you're like, oh, I got to go take that course, or still few more articles to read, and it's like, unless you are like truly deem yourself like to be the expert, then you're like not good enough. So she kind of goes into these like 5 subcategories, which I don't know, I think a lot of us can find ourselves in at least in one of the competency types. And it was just like really, really helpful too. I think in Valerie's book, she was like contemplating, like telling a story about how a woman was like up for a promotion, and she was like, just kind of like all those thought process, like, do I really want that? Like, can I do this? And I think Valerie asked her like a question was like, is it that you don't think you can, or is it that you don't think you want it? And oftentimes we don't ask ourselves that question. Like, we're always like so fierce, oh, can I do this? But we don't actually ask ourselves, is this actually what I want? Like, that's again, something that's not taught to us. It's like, take what you're given, do good. It's not like, oh, is this actually really what's aligning with what I want?
Say yes to everything. This is how you not say yes to everything. Yes, you could do that thing, but do you want to do that thing? Oh, I love it. Great language for that. Great language for that. And then I do sometimes wonder, like, when and where in the hell did we ever, as women especially, get the notion that we have to do it alone? I think that's one thing I love about our community and Together Digital and being a part of it for so long, is just that, like, I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for the community and for others who knew me and understood me and believed in me. I just don't even know where that came from, that we have to not only just go and be it all and do it all, but we have to do it alone, It's so sad. It's so sad. It's so disappointing. You don't have to, ladies. If you're listening, I promise that you don't. I love those 5 types because I think, again, within the book and with how you explained it, it just helps to create some additional self-awareness so that you start to understand and know, where you might find some pitfalls, where you might get in your own way, and also how you can get some help. Another area that you talk a lot about in your book is being in touch with our feelings, which I know for some of us, thanks to years of suppression, may find hard, or we may lack language for identifying and sharing our feelings. So giving it language to me is obviously really important. Can you help us understand how, I alluded to this earlier, how resentment plays into where we lack or need power, and what are some other feelings that are worth listening more closely to outside of resentment, of course?
Yeah, like resentment, I think I call that like a little bit of like a breadcrumb, right? Whereas like, if that's showing up in your life, like that has meaning, right? There's something behind that. I think just like starting with like the ABCs of feelings, because I know I don't think I cried for a period of like 3 years, right? Like, because I just was like, I became this like machine, right? Of just like, get it done, let's do this. And like, without even being able to be in touch with like naming feelings. So even like being able to name your feelings, like beyond just, I feel like off right now, like with like some specificity, I think is super, super helpful, right? Because so often we can't put into words a lot of times what we're feeling or why we're feeling that way. But I think resentment, I remember specifically, again, I was in the car again. This is weird. I was like getting on 270, the freeway, and I was on the phone with my mom. And this was again, like in my dark days where I was, and she's like, honey, I think that you should probably go part-time.
Oh, yeah, that would have made me.
I was like,
throw something.
And I remember like putting my foot on the gas, like, just like, oh, you have no you have no, and I think she was like going on a vacation that week, and I was just like, I felt so much like anger and like frustration inside. Right. And at the time I like didn't know why. Right. But like through my self-discovery process, what I realized is that I had a little envy towards my mom. She did not work while I grew up, right? And so like my life looks, probably a little bit different than hers did, when she was my age. Nor right nor wrong, right? That was my choice. But it was just like I got so pissed. And looking back at that, why I was resentful at her that she was going on vacation and telling me this is because that's what I actually wanted, right? I wanted more time to myself, and I didn't actually make the connection until like years later that like, oh, the reason I'm so upset is because I needed a vacation.
You needed that massage.
I needed the massage, and I just needed some time, right, to myself that she was clearly giving to herself, and good for her for doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's when resentment shows up, it oftentimes can lead us into figuring out kind of what we need, or maybe we need to set boundaries in certain areas, or ask for something that we need, or maybe we've like set an expectation that somebody else isn't able to meet, and all these other things, which is how like kind of resentment can start showing its head. So if you are feeling resentment, maybe towards a colleague or something
Yeah.
like that, why is that, right?
Yep.
Like, is it because they can just check out, and be okay with, mediocre, and you can't? You know what I mean? Like, what is it?
Yeah. That is such great advice. I've heard it and said it often before. It's like that trap of comparison. It's such a like wonderful way to self-destruct. And, envy is really kind of pointing you in the direction of your desires. And if you don't slow down and ask yourself, what makes me so either envious or resentful about some situation, some person, home or work? Yeah, you're right. There's some kind of desire there that, or need that you're ignoring or not acknowledging or validating. I also want to recommend a book for those of you who are looking for more language around emotions. And that was Brene Brown's book. If probably lots of you listening have already read it, but Atlas of the Heart, if you haven't, it's just a tremendous book to kind of keep as a resource. You can read it front cover to cover, but I think also it's something that's worth going back to from time to time. To allow yourself to be reminded as to how complex our emotions and our feelings are, and the duality of some of those things to help sort of untangle those situations. One of my favorite ones, actually, for those of you who are listening, who've been affected by the recent layoffs, because there have been so many within marketing and tech, is disenfranchised grief. In the sense that we don't believe as a society certain things are we're not permitted to grieve publicly, and we're not allowed a mourning period for certain things like the death of a pet, the loss of a job, a divorce. We kind of just allow people to take bereavement time and mourn for the death of a family member, and even that we kind of try to keep it short and move on and stay happy and peppy for everybody else. It's like the book just does such a phenomenal job of really kind of digging into deeper emotions like that to help you identify and understand what you're feeling so you can give it words. And to me, words give it power. So thank you so much for that, Lauren. When I saw you talking about resentment in there, I was like, oh, we got to talk about this. As a powerful emotion that we tend to just assume it's a part of how we are just being, but it's such a big indicator for more.
Well, and a lot of times it comes up as judgment, like,
Yes. Good call.
yeah, which is.
Yeah. Good call. Good call. Judgment, envy, resentment, all very important things to listen to. What about our bodies? Our bodies obviously tell us a lot. And, if you've ever been like the dark days of Lauren or myself, as we both seem to have experienced at some point in our lives, how are we not listening to our bodies, and what can we start to do in order to become more in touch with how we're feeling physically, not just like healthy, like, feeling, but like feeling. I think this is an interesting and new concept for a lot of people that are listening, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Like, obviously that connection, the mind muscle, right, into your body, right, is really important, because our bodies are like always giving us signs. A lot of times we're missing, right, because we're just on to the next thing. But like, I mean, they can happen like physically. Like, I know when my left eye starts to twitch, like we gotta shut it down. Like, and that happens from time to time. And or sometimes you're like, your gut will speak to you, like you can't, you don't understand like why you're having this feeling, but it's like telling you something. And sometimes we'll let the rational mind take over, the rational servant mind, when in reality we need to be listening to that. And so I think it takes practice. And that's another, again, when I say yoga, I mean like a lot of different things, guys. Sure. Like these mindfulness cards are yoga, right? Are a form of yoga. So it's just like being able to get in touch with that side. And what I found is like most busy driven women, and again, this is coming from my own experience and then other women that I've worked with or talked with, it's like, because there is always so much to do on your plate, it's harder to tap into that, because again, we suppress it, right? Oh, got to do the next thing. You know what I mean? It's like, even though when it does speak, we've somehow learned and taught ourselves how to kind of be like, okay, yep, tame it down, can't listen. Let me go grab that next cup of coffee, right? Like It's, and it's we've trained our bodies and our minds to do the opposite of actually what we need to be doing to allow this inspiration. Because every one of us has, I believe, like hidden gems in us that we don't even know about. Like if you were to tell me that I was going to write a book, or that like I like to write, I would have literally laughed in your face and been like, are you speaking to the chick behind me? Because that is not me. Right. And it wasn't even until I could get in touch with some of these other things inside myself that it like unlocked. Right. So things, how you think you might be or who you are, maybe you've not even scratched the surface. Maybe there's other people where like you do know what your gifts are, or like, that you have something special inside of you, but like you're not like fully embracing it for whatever reason. So it could come up in like different forms. But for me, it was like I didn't even know some of these jewels that were in me. And I was like, oh, okay, guess we're here.
I think a part of finding your power is identifying the things emotionally and physically that are draining or, taking power from you. I mean, I've, had my fair share of, chronic migraines, indigestion, and like you even mentioned caffeine, we've got all these temporary balms to kind of soothe over whatever it is that we're feeling. We take Tylenol, we down a bottle of Tums. Like, I mean, I remember at one point, I made a social media post about it and I was like, just another day at the office. And it was like my 2 cups of coffee, my bottle of water that was half drunk, and some Tylenol and some antacid. And that was like that was the status of my desk at all times. And I didn't see it at the time, but that was really telling of my body is telling me that things are not in balance, that I need less stress in my life, and I need to listen to what's happening to my body. And I think, looking around and seeing what you have from a dependency standpoint, what are you supplementing? Like, what are you giving your power away to by not acknowledging what's happening inside your body? And I want to say for just a second and get on this little soapbox for women. I love listening to Glennon Doyle's podcast as well. We Can Do Hard Things. And one of the things that really struck me in one of her early episodes was just talking about, she has a body, what's the term for it? It's like a body dysmorphia kind of like issue where she just sees herself very differently than what she is. And she's dealt with eating disorders and whatnot. And one of the things that she had said that was super powerful to me was that she said, I am no longer working out to make myself smaller, to make other people comfortable. I am no longer torturing my body through physical activity to somehow make myself be in the physique in which I think the rest of the world wants me to be. If I'm going to be moving, it is going to be with purpose and with passion and things that bring me joy. And I totally took that to heart. And that's exactly why I went back to doing more yoga, including yin, by the way, if you all are into yoga. Yin, talk about slow. You would do like 5 poses in 1 hour, but it's just such a great release. At least I find it to be. Meditation, walking and hiking, because at the end of the day, sometimes getting out there and getting your adrenaline up and doing hard, long distance, and high impact things. If that brings you power, then by golly, keep doing it. But if it doesn't, and you're doing it to make yourself either smaller or fit into a mold for others, then you're giving away your power. I don't know if you agree or not, Lauren, but I just had to get on soapbox for a second.
I do. And I think trying new things too. Cause like sometimes like when we that's great if you know what brings you power, but like, what if something could bring you even more power, right? How would you know unless you try it? Right. Like I've always if I had an hour, I was running, I was doing a HIIT class, right? But like, I had no idea like the power I could feel doing some of these other things, like my aerial yoga and like no idea, right? So until you stay curious and allow yourself to be open to try new things, you may be missing out on some of these jewels again that are within you that can bring you the power that you're looking for.
And in your bio, we had this in common too, on the water. I started kayaking, and that was like a big, big deal for me. It is definitely like my happy place outside of it being physical activity. I find it mentally like nourishing. And we were on vacation in the Outer Banks this last year, and it was the king tide. So things like were a little rough out there, but I went out in the morning anyways. And there was a woman that lived next door who kayaked every morning, but she didn't even dare go out that morning. And I was like pulling my boat in, and I guess she'd been watching me, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're so courageous." And in that moment, I really felt powerful because I had to just figure out how to go with the tide, when to just let it go or when to go up against it. It was just such a good mental, physical activity. I do, if I could give any of you all homework after today, is just to find and sort of explore those types of things that do truly make you feel like you're coming into your own power. So much so that random strangers will tell you.
That's amazing.
Right? It was so sweet.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. All right. When we look to our power, oftentimes we feel like we are powerful in the times. Sorry, let me see if I can say this again. Often when we look for our power, we look for it in times in which we feel powerful. In what ways can we leverage breakdowns, as you frame it in your book so beautifully, to create breakthroughs?
Yeah, well, as humans, like, right, we want that control. We don't want to feel like those bad feelings, right? And I think we do a lot of things to have that false sense of control, right?
Mm.
And I think what's beautiful, at least in my experience of breakdowns, is you're at this place of like openness and like vulnerability where you are so crumbled at that, your breakdown, right? You feel just kind of like, oh, don't have anything else to give. I'm hopeless. It's like that is at the point where you're like so open to trying new things, right? Or like, okay, I'll do that, right? Stuff that you would not normally entertain. And that's been my greatest growth opportunities is my breakdowns, because there's this, I'm like, I love quotes and I don't actually know who says this one, but I heard it and I was like, yes. And it was like it said something like, in school, you're taught the lesson and then you're given the test, right?
Right.
But in life, it's totally different. In life, you're given the test.
Yeah.
And then if you're lucky, you learn the lesson.
That's
And
great.
it's just like, I was like, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
And, but it's like, I just find that why break down, like when you're in that state of breakdowns, like, and it's going to ebb and flow. Like I just had a breakdown, where I was like in my shit, in my head, and I was like, I got to get out of this. Like, but it's like, it was there for a reason to teach me something, right? So that I could get back out of it and share it with others. Right. So when you reframe it and you stay open, it's just really beautiful things can come out of it.
Yeah, I love it. Apparently that was Tom Bought. Thank you, Julie,
Oh,
for
yeah,
your
thanks.
speedy Googling skills. And that's a great quote. I'm definitely going to hang on to that. It also made me think, we were just talking about kids in grade school, and I forgot to bring it up, but that comment just made me remember, like, how would our world be different if we stopped asking our kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, and just started asking them, who do you want to be?
No, I just ask them, what is your most important job
I like that
to do what makes you happy?
Right.
Right. Like we're not taught that. It's so simplistic. What makes you happy? Because it's like when you are fulfilled, you naturally give back with like such power and ease, right? There's a sense of like that masculinity of power, because it's like you're doing what you love, but then there's that feminine side of like that flow and ease, because it's comes so naturally to you. And it's just, we're not taught that.
No, I agree. I love that so much. All right. Lastly, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Live listeners, feel free to drop it in the chat or come off of mute if you feel so inclined. Don't be shy. We love the questions. So lastly, Lauren, for you, I'm asking, how can practice and ritual begin to help us not just find our power, but hold on to it?
So rituals can be really, really powerful if it resonates with you. And I think resonation is like probably the biggest thing I can leave with the audience. Whereas like if you're meditating because somebody else told you to meditate and like if it's not doing anything for you, stop fucking meditating.
Right. Yep.
Like you have to figure out what is like hitting you, right? What's fueling you? And it goes back to energy again. I started my first coach when I was, again, in my very dark days. She was like, this just came from you. You need to start repeating this every day. And I was like, pretty sure that didn't come from me. Like doubting everything she was saying. And it was like basically how I'm filled with like light and love and how I'm whole and complete and yada, yada, yada. Again, it was a breakdown moment. So I was like, sure, I'll do it. And, I did. I committed to her and I started repeating this affirmation. And when I said it, did it fully align? not 100%, but there was something in me that like drew me to it and made me continue to repeat this affirmation. And as I continued to do it, it really started to stick, right? And it started improving my confidence in the way I like was thinking about my day and how I was showing up. And so whether it be after, there's a ton of things that you can do from a ritual perspective, whether it is meditating, whether it is taking a walk, whether it's, maybe it's just waking up 5 minutes earlier than everybody else in your house to have some hot coffee. Like, it doesn't always have to be something like, oh, or maybe it's reading, right? Like I know at one point, and this has changed in my journey, like over time, like right now I'm really been big into like my mindfulness cards, and my oracle cards, shuffling those, see what the universe is presenting to me that day. Sometimes it's reading something inspirational, but I think it really just goes back to what is resonating with you, what works for you. But step one, like you said at the beginning of the call, is showing up and doing it. I know for like ever, right? I had met with that coach like months before. She had told me to do that like 4 months ago, right? And it wasn't until I had my breakdown, was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it.
I'll do the thing. Yeah, I love that. Ritual and mindset is not woo-woo for anyone that's listening. I mean, there's a ton of scientific research behind, affirmations to me is a form of positive visualization. Athletes, like professional athletes, Olympians, use this to be top performers. Like, so there is psychology behind it. There is science behind it in sort of, leveraging these tools. And I do love your advice, Lauren. I think sometimes too, if you're a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist, a lot of these ideas like meditation, journaling, other rituals might feel a little like too constraining because all of a sudden like you're lacking some control. Or if you don't do it every day because it's ritual, then all of a sudden now you're bad at ritually doing whatever it is, doing rituals. And so, yeah, I think I just really like how you allowed for folks to kind of step into that space of finding what works for them to help them find their power and then leverage ritual in a non-stringent and graceful way.
One thing I did want to also point out, and I know you said like comparison is like the root of all, like we don't want to do that. I want to offer like just like a counter perspective, and maybe this is more of envy than anything else, but in my book, I have a chapter called Unicorns. And I think that, yes, if you're comparing yourself to somebody and it's making you feel worse about yourself, absolutely. Like, there's no room for that here. But when you look at somebody, and again, this probably goes more to envy than comparison, but when you look at somebody and you're really trying to figure out what you're passionate about, because again, I had no idea. If you held a gun to my head and asked me what I was passionate about or why I was here, I'd be dead. But what I did start to notice is that when I looked at other women, right, I call them my unicorns. Like I was seeing these qualities within them. And yeah, would I compare myself? Yes, but it was almost like what I was seeing in them was actually living inside myself. I just didn't know it at the time. And so when you are looking at other women, you're like, oh, I wish I could be more like them. Like that's placed in your path for a reason. And so to look at comparison just a little bit differently, because again, I think it depends on how it makes you feel, but allow comparison to be a breadcrumb for you.
Yep. Absolutely agree. Absolutely. Great distinction. All right, Lauren, thank you so much for this. Everyone, if you want to connect with Lauren, who's listening live, make sure that you check out our website, and you can follow her on Instagram. We will include all of those links in the show notes as well. Lauren, I'm so glad that you were able to find your power and then really work to help bring that opportunity to so many other women. I hope all of you listening feel a little more encouraged to do so.
Yeah, thanks for creating this amazing community and for having me.
Of course. Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. I'm excited to see you back next week. We are going to be doing another Wednesday recording at noon Eastern. We are going to be talking about unhiding and how it can actually help with diversity, equity, and inclusion and connection. We're interviewing another book author. I love my book authors. I love all these women that have written books and talking to you all that's talked about single-handedly. Ruth was born without a fully formed hand, and literally hit it for the first 13 years of her life and throughout her professional career. She has an amazing TEDx talk online that you can listen to as well. But I hope that we can see you there so we can enjoy another empowering conversation. We'll drop the link in the chat as well. So if you want to register for that event, it is up and live. Lauren, thank you again. And I hope we get to talk again soon. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.